listen up. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to the podcast participants, and not to any participant's employer, organization, committee, or other group or individual. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. You know, for fun. So lighten up and enjoy. Hello, Stomping Jen.
Sawtooth Frank.
How you doing?
Great.
You must be excited for this episode that we're doing. We're going to be talking to Mikey Mosher, who is a Chicago-based artist who works in collage, video, projection, sculpture, and other types of installations.
Yay.
You are a collage artist.
I dabble.
Yeah, I mean,
little.
You have a show coming up.
I do have a show coming up.
I think this is going to be really interesting to kind of get some thoughts from another collage artist out there.
This is true.
I'm really looking forward to talking to Mikey.
Me too.
So we'll do that on the other side of our what?
Awesome. On our intro.
That's
got
right.
me all like befuddled.
That's right.
You got
That's
me all
what I
mashed
do.
up.
Befuddle people. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
The Soft Serve Podcast. Creamy, delicious ideas without the creepy truck. Stomping Jen.
Oh, you did all the buttons.
Yeah, I'm not going to sing to you.
You're like sneaky like that.
Yeah, I am a very, very sneaky host.
You are.
That's what I'm known for, sneaking around.
You are.
Well, let's turn this down and say hello to Mikey. Hello, Mikey.
Hey, how's it going?
Really good. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Things have been pretty busy recently, but they're starting to slow down, which is really nice. So I'm good.
And you're joining us from Chicago, right? That's where you're based out of?
Yep.
That's an awesome city. I love Chicago.
Yeah, me too.
It's so orderly, and the streets are so well laid out.
You mean not like Boston?
It really is.
Yeah, well, Stomping Jen makes a good point. It's like when you go to a city like Boston, that's a mess, or like the boroughs of New York that are a total mess, and then you go to a place like Chicago, it's great.
Yeah. Well, New York's like a grid.
True.
Yeah. How long have you been in Chicago?
I just got to Chicago in August, so
nice.
only 4 or 5 months, 5-6 months.
Nice.
I lose track of time, but yeah, I mean, it's actually also my first time living in a big city, so
Oh, cool.
an adjustment, but I really like it.
Yeah, where are you moving from? Like, what kind of smaller location are you coming from?
Yeah, so I was living in Northampton, Mass, up until right before I moved out here, and I grew up on Cape Cod.
Oh, nice.
So both very quiet places compared to here.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't realize Mikey was coming from our area.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I feel more connected to you now.
For sure.
Yes. Yeah. I found him in a collage magazine that I am fond of.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and it said Northampton, and then so I looked him up, and he didn't live in Northampton anymore, but that was okay. That was okay. You still agreed to come on this, so yeah.
What was the collage magazine?
It's called Collage, but it's not spelled like collage. It's spelled with a K and a J.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
LOJ.
K,
Now, is that magazine kind of like any other artistic journal? You submit pieces to it for consideration?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think it's pretty much anyone can sort of become part of their directory. and you like pay dues to continue to be on that directory. And sometimes they pull people from out of the archives and put them in the physical magazine and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mikey, you think of yourself and describe yourself as a multidisciplinary artist. And in my intro, I tried to talk a little bit about what some of those were, but I'm just kind of curious. I wanted to get your thoughts on what that means to you, like being a multidisciplinary artist.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I've really only started to think of myself that way since starting the MFA program that I'm in right now, which is at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Before that, I mean, I've been doing visual art for like my whole life, but I feel like I only really started taking it seriously like a year or two before I applied here. But since starting the program, I've like started experimenting with a bunch of different mediums. And so I think coming from collage, it doesn't really fit snugly into the major categories that exist in the art community, like sculpture, printmaking, painting, like the major mediums. So I feel like I already felt like I was pulling from a lot of different places, and now it's like starting to actualize into really like experimenting with different disciplines.
Yeah, and some of those disciplines, in addition to like the hand cut collage, and I've seen this in some of your work when I was going through your website, are video, projection, sculpture, right, animation. Yeah. Are those all things you've had to kind of teach yourself?
Well, so with video, actually before I came to school here, video editing was actually like my full-time job. Oh. Yeah, so I was working for a nonprofit called Visionaries, which actually my dad founded, and I ended up working for them after I graduated undergrad. Mm-hmm. And kind of like worked my way up to being a video editor with them. And so they were making like documentaries about other nonprofits. So basically we would like profile the work of different organizations. But anyway, so video editing was like this thing that I had become really proficient at in like a very professional and specific way. And so once I got into art school, I knew that I was going to like start integrating that into my practice in some way, but it started to take like a bunch of different forms. And I think now I actually really think of video editing as like a kind of collage. And I think there's a lot of people throughout like art history who have sort of come to that same conclusion, which is super interesting to me, that like the early parts of like theory of film were deeply intertwined with like the movements who were pioneering collage. And so that's one of the things that continues to make it interesting for me, that like, not only is this overlap in my mind, but it's also like something that's been acknowledged as like, yeah, like a deep part of film.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have like very rudimentary film editing skills, like mostly iMovie and Final Cut. I've taken a bunch of like professional level classes in Final Cut. And like what's interesting to me is when you think about like the timeline, like a video timeline, and how it is like blocks of static images and you arrange them around, and you're thinking very much like, oh, I'm going to put this image here, that image there. I don't know. In my mind, that kind of maps maybe a little bit to this idea of collage. I don't know.
That sounds totally, exactly
sure.
like collage.
I mean, I think it's also like, you know, taking things that are inherently like fragmented from each other and building something that feels cohesive out of them, which is the thing that's been like interesting to me about collage. But I think it's also kind of scratches the same itch as like editing and getting like an edit that feels cohesive.
Yeah. In your bio, I was really fascinated to read this. You say that your work is really heavily influenced by a background in religious studies when you were in an undergraduate course of study. And I was just kind of curious how you came to study that as an undergrad.
Yeah. So I went to undergrad at Hampshire College in Western Mass. And I think the educational environment there, it's known for really letting you kind of explore freely. I mean, there's no grades. After a certain amount of time, there's no required classes. And I came in as like a very, I guess, like existential and curious teenager. I was like really, I think, like a lot of teenagers are concerned with like the meaning of life. And I think it really has a lot to do with my upbringing, which was somewhat religious, but I was raised by two people who were raised Catholic and excommunicated from the Catholic Church, one of which became an atheist and the other is still pretty religious. And so,
oh, wow.
Growing up through that process sort of made me have a lot of conflicting feelings about religion. I don't know, conflicting is the word, actually. I feel like I had a lot of negative feelings about religion.
Yeah.
And then when I was growing up on Cape Cod, I had this like really strong connection to nature there. And I think having this sort of like thing that I couldn't really describe in any other way is than like spiritual connection with the place that I grew up was difficult to reconcile with the way that I felt about religion. And so that's something that I still think about all the time, like what the difference between like that direct spiritual feeling that I think we all have the capacity to feel, and the thing that religion has become, which is like this set of rules and dogmas and traditions and things that don't necessarily always feel good or beneficial to our lives. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
It's a very long-winded answer.
No, that is a fascinating background. That and I have to say, I've told this to Stomping Jen before. Like, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I'm incredibly attracted to the spirituality of Catholicism, and like, I find the imagery in it incredibly powerful and moving, and the stories, like, I don't know, they just strike me like here. But I'm not I'm not a
practicing,
and I'm not a believer, but I like somehow still connect to all of that in a very spiritual way.
I feel the same way. And I wasn't raised Catholic, but like literally all of my family members who were born before me were raised Catholic or are still Catholic. And so I don't know, I feel that same connection like aesthetically to like the imagery of Catholicism. And I think part of my practice is almost like trying to pull those things out and like recontextualize them in a way that feels like more direct and fulfilling, and leaves behind the things, or maybe like arranges the things that I feel negatively about in a way that critiques it and the things that like I feel like it's led to in our society, or that like I connect with like contemporary issues in politics or American culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I want to pause and just tell people, as we're beginning to talk about some of your pieces here shortly and some of your work, I want people to kind of pause this and go to your website. It's MikeyMosher.com. And browse around and look at Mikey's works. We're going to reference a bunch of them. And as we're talking about the pieces, I'll encourage everyone listening just to pause, go look at the pieces, like then come back to this conversation, right? Just so you can get a sense of what we're talking about. That's a good thing about a podcast. So you can always pause.
Right.
So definitely do that as we're going along. If you're finding yourself a little lost or disconnected from the things we're talking about, definitely go look at Mikey's website. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Mikey, is this idea of spiritual qualities and some of the structures in our life. So you mentioned nature, and I'm kind of curious, like where you see spirituality in nature, and like what you pull out of nature in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my feelings on that really are rooted in the place where I grew up and the experiences I had growing up on Cape Cod, spending a really big amount of time riding my bike by the ocean and walking around in the woods. And I feel like that part of my adolescence was really in contrast with my experience in public school. I feel like I really felt like the sort of sterile environment of the schools I was going to was this polar opposite to the experiences that I was having with my friends out in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think felt really important and enriching. And I think I also had some people around me who were able to help me process those feelings and really build this relationship with, I don't know, a deeper level of my consciousness. I feel like is still really impactful on the way that I just interact with the world in general now, and the way that I think of the world around me. So I think it's hard to say exactly what it is, but I think in general, I feel we as human beings are inextricably connected with nature, that we are part of this one coherent system, that we're inseparable from each other, and that we have the ability to strengthen that connection in some ways, and share that connection with others. And I feel that way because I've experienced it directly. And I think there's I think I have a desire to try to share that and foster that through my practice in some ways, whether it's the process of making it for me, but I think more recently it's really trying to communicate that in the experience of interacting with the work in person.
Yeah,
so interesting.
And I think and we'll talk about this. I think you've been successful at it, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. Go ahead, Stomper Jen.
No, I was just going to say it's very reminiscent of a recent conversation that we just had.
Which one?
With another guest that we just had about talking about nature.
Oh, right, spirituality and nature. Yeah, we talked to Dave Eierman, who is a shamanic coach. That was pretty interesting. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Thank you for reminding me of that, Stomping Jen. Mikey, the other thing you talk about are there are spiritual qualities that you explore and are interested in relation to capitalism in media. And for a while I was kind of sitting with that, trying to think, what does that mean? And then something popped into my mind, this article I read a few years back about how work has become the new religion for a lot of people, right? That is where they find their meaning and their self. And of course there are the capitalist forces behind most of our work these days. And is that sort of what you're getting at when you're talking about the spiritual qualities of capitalism, or is it something else?
Well, I think for better or for worse, I feel like I've sort of set up this dichotomy in my head between spirituality and religion. And I feel like I'm sort of still deconstructing whether or not that's like a valid distinction, because I feel like it's way more nuanced than that. But I think what religion really is not just this set of rules and doctrines and dogmas, but it's a set of rules and doctrines and dogmas that feed you the sensation of spiritual connection. And I think that's the reason that religion as like a system and I think like when we talk about religion, I think we're often really talking about like Christianity and Catholicism rather than religion in general. So
Right.
I think in Western culture, like when the Protestant Reformation happened, when society slowly became secularized over the course of hundreds of years, as capitalism started to become the dominant driving force of culture, I think the carrot on the end of the stick changed from being an afterlife, spiritual fulfillment in the afterlife, a connection with God, and it became material success, or just money in general, commodities, status. And I think that's kind of where we're at now. Mm-hmm. And I think mass media plays like a sort of analogous role to like the clergy in like Renaissance Catholicism, in that it's constantly reinforcing that set of power structures, whether it's like a big conspiracy or if it's just the way that it is. It doesn't really matter, because the outcome is that it's reinforcing that set of circumstances, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Question.
Go ahead.
Do you read Neil Gaiman at all?
I feel like I've heard that name, but I don't think I've read Neil Gaiman.
Okay. So he wrote a book called American Gods, which explores that very thing that you were just talking about.
Okay, interesting.
To a degree, yeah. I mean, they made it into an awful TV series on Starz.
Oh, wait. What is the series called again?
American Gods.
Yeah, American
I feel like
Gods.
I have heard of that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. You might be interested in it, as just as an aside, because it really connects to kind of what you were just talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll definitely check that out.
So one of your pieces, and I absolutely was really sitting with it today. I was looking at it. It's called Customer Obsession. And this is, in course, correct me if I'm describing it wrong. This is my impression, is like just a completely naive observer of your kind of work, right? I'm Stomping Jen will tell you, I'm not an art historian. I'm not anybody who knows anything really about art. It looked like a kind of like a video kind of collage to me, like a moving collage that pictures Jeff Bezos and kind of like sprinkling money around, and he's got these robotic arms, and there's an audio clip of an anti-union training video playing beneath it all. And I was sitting there enjoying your piece so much in light of the recent Amazon union victory that we just saw happen like a week and a half ago. And in full disclosure, I'm a union president in my real job. So
that's great.
I am obviously a big fan and proponent of organized labor. And I loved watching your video. And I guess what I'm saying is I love a piece like that because it was made at a time, and it probably, if I had watched it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I would have had a very different experience with it than watching it today for the first time, right? Like it almost became a celebratory piece of work to me, like watching it today. I don't know, like just didn't know if you had any thoughts or reflections on that piece of work.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked me about that, because I've been thinking about that piece obviously over the past week or so, and how exactly like you said, it reads differently now. And I wonder about this because I wonder like if it makes more or less sense to show it publicly now, because it's being perceived in a way that I didn't necessarily make it to be perceived, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But I made that when Jeff Bezos was still like the acting CEO of Amazon, when I was thinking a lot about like what the role of billionaires are in our society in the context of all the stuff that we were just talking about. Like if you were to draw this analog between like, you know, the height of like Renaissance Catholicism and contemporary billionaires, like what role would they hold other than like, you know, like gods or angels or something like that? They're like, you know, beyond human in their ability to wield power, which is obviously, I think, terrible. Like, I think that's objectively a bad thing.
And now they're literally leaving the planet, right? And
exactly.
like ascending to these, literally ascending to these celestial heights.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think there's just like a poetry to that I think is like, maybe a little bit too obvious, but I feel like it's worth expressing, you know? And that's really what was behind that piece, like just wanting to also like just mock the powerful, I feel like is always a worthwhile thing to do. But yeah, I think now it can be seen as a celebratory piece in a way, like you said. And I kind of like that maybe even more than what it was before, because before it felt a little feudal, I guess. Like, you know, I'm just some random artist like making fun of Jeff Bezos, but now it feels like we have more of a reason to shove it in his face, you know?
Yeah.
Which is great. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Is this a common challenge for you as an artist who works in a medium that's kind of, I guess maybe all art to some degree is fixed, but a video like that, like are you frequently forced to confront like the meanings of your work over time and grapple with that?
For sure. It's something I thought about a lot, especially when I was doing hand cut stuff, because at that time I was really trying to respond to things that were happening. And I think the end of the Trump presidency was kind of like a paradigm shift for my practice, because my practice really came to this like very specific sensibility and style and like level of absurdity in a time where I feel like that was super appropriate. And I think, not that I feel like Joe Biden has like fixed everything, but I feel like there was just this level of like constantly in your face absurdity that I felt like I needed to like sort through every day in order to feel like I had a grip on reality. And I think my collage practice was the thing that did that for me, or like at least sometimes did that for me. And so like I found myself like collaging as a way of like expressing and working through the absurdity of like specific events in the news. And it felt unsustainable after a little while, because there was just always something. And actually like one of the really like the last large scale hand cut collage I did was this piece called A Quilt for Your Lungs, which was, I did it like in January 2021. And and it's basically like a farewell to 2020. It's like, I mean, I can, you can direct people to check it out for more context, but basically it was like me reaching this inflection point where it was like right after the insurrection at the Capitol, and I was like, how could things get more absurd than they are right now? I mean, obviously they always can, but I think that was like the breaking point when I realized like I can't keep up, and it was like an expression of the lack of being able to keep up and like the last ditch effort to find order in that process.
Yeah, I'm looking at the piece now, and again, like Mikey said, we encourage you to go pause this, go look at it. I mean, it's an intense piece.
Are these images recreated, or are they the same that you manipulated? Are they? I'm looking at it. Sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. Do you mean like the different images throughout the collage?
Yeah.
So each like individual triangle is like a separate piece of paper.
Okay.
So like I made this basically like this lattice drawn onto the paper, and did basically like a color by number sort of thing where like I picked spots in each little square.
Right.
That would be a set of like 8 colors. And then distributed that pattern throughout the whole piece.
Wow.
And then organized the individual little triangles in those different colors, and then placed them throughout the collage.
Wow. So there's nothing duplicated here. It's all different.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's intense.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to put it down.
Yeah. No,
it was very labor intensive.
Yeah, I could imagine. And I can kind of almost like feel from this that it's like the culmination of an epic, like of an emotional epic that a lot of us like felt like we were going through,
Yeah, totally.
And like to your point, like Trump was like an in addition to being an authoritarian, anti-constitutional piece of shit. Those are my words. I mean, he was exhausting. Like you said, he was like in your face all of the time, and like you could never get away from it. And even though Biden has his issues, like there's a relief in the silence, like coming out of that office. And it's like, it's not the pause in the gaslighting that you felt like every single freaking day of your life. It's just not a constant radio stream of insanity. Like,
right.
And
yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier about like this, the religiosity of like the system that we're currently in now, I feel like the thing that to me made those 4 years so unique was Trump's ability to like light up that potential in like this extremely bizarre way, like to fully tap into the the sensationality of the like media apparatus that had already been set up, and just like exploit it to like this incredible degree. And I think that's part of what I was, I think, trying to capture from a lot of different angles. And it was usually not directly about Trump, but just like this heightened level of absurdity that became commonplace during that time period.
Yeah. Thanks for that explanation.
I have another technical question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How large is that piece?
That piece is 28 by 40 inches.
Okay.
So what's that, big.
Like? It's like two
and a half by 3.5 feet ish.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
That's a big piece.
That's big.
Yeah.
And that piece, is that piece in your exhibition, looking
It
through. So let's
It
talk.
is, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the exhibition, kind of as a set of things. Like, how did um, I'm not going to ask it that way. How did looking through come together for you, like as an artist?
Yeah. Well, so the way that I thought about it was trying to do a couple things, but mainly I wanted to like kind of chart the journey from like that last big hand cut piece to like my latest projects, which didn't involve any hand cut collage, but were still like deeply rooted in like the ideas about collage that I had built up during that time. And so it was really me trying to make sense of that arc and conceptualize it and sort of think back on the connections between the themes that I was working with and make sense of them, I guess.
Okay. Now, physically, is looking through like in a studio space? Like, where is it situated, and how, if people are in the Chicago area, like, how do they come and see it?
So, unfortunately, it's no longer up. Actually, so that was my MFA thesis exhibition.
Okay.
So,
nice.
So that was at the gallery of the school that I go to.
Okay, but we could see these things online. We can see all of these pieces online and experience them there. Yep.
It's heavily documented, and I'm actually currently working on shopping around a proposal to have it in another gallery here in Chicago.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Let's talk. I want to talk about one of the pieces in looking through. Again, people go to the website and look at this. Open Sky. Talk to us a little bit about that piece and how it came about for you. This is an absolutely fascinating piece.
Thank you. Yeah. So that piece, I think like the sort of seed for it was after the end of my first semester in this program, actually like around the same time that I made that last big collage, I had like built this wood structure in my studio, which was basically like a backlit projector screen. And it was really like my first time ever building something out of wood by myself. And the way that it worked, which I should put it like a diagram or something up on the site because it's like kind of hard to just explain verbally, but basically there's the wood structure and there's a shelf on it, and a projector sits on that, projects into a mirror, and then that image is bounced onto the back of a paper screen. And so you stand in front, and because the image has been reversed once by the mirror and reversed again by projecting on the back of the paper, standing in front of it, you see the original image, but you, by interacting with it, walking around it, you're not interrupting the projector image.
Right.
And so that principle of like projecting is kind of what was the seed of that project, Open Sky. And once I got to Chicago, I knew I wanted to sort of like replicate that in some way, in a way that felt like more refined and like fleshed out. And so it started with like the middle structure, which is like this arch version of that that piece. And I ended up sort of thinking about it as like an altarpiece. Yeah. And the original version of it too was actually just a way of displaying the digital scans of my hand cut collages. And that process of like trying to decide what was the final product of those collages, whether it was like the physical collage or like the documentation of it, the scan of it, which was often like super high quality and had like a very different quality. It's the thing that you're seeing usually when you're looking at them online, was what basically led to me trying to like experiment with different ways of showing them. And it was specifically, I think, because we were in the middle of a pandemic and like I didn't really have a way of like bringing people to see them in person. And so a lot of the way, like really the only way that people were seeing them were in these like digital reproductions. And so really that process is what led to all of the different experiments that I did during this program, because it was like this gateway through the digital representation of the physical thing. But to get like a little bit more specific about the Open Sky project, once I was done with my first year in this program, which was remote, and I had a studio in East Hampton, Massachusetts, I had bought this like high video recorder, which is like, you know, like a 90s like tape video recorder.
Yeah, like a Super 8, right?
Same
Super 8.
Sorry,
so is it Super 8? Right, that's what they call it.
It's
no,
like
a
after
camcorder.
Super 8.
Oh.
And after VHS, it's like the last thing before they like went digital, like fully digital, basically.
Got it.
And it was like the same, pretty much the same recorder that like my home movies as a child were filmed on. And so I had this like sort of nostalgic connection to the physical object. And what I started doing was just recording videos and like carrying it around with me, like pretty much everywhere I went when I was in Western Mass. And it was like starting to be spring and summer. And like anyone who lives there knows like that can be like extremely magical. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, I think I was sort of also trying to document that quality of the place that I'd spent a lot of time in, because I knew I was leaving for the first time, like really leaving Massachusetts for the first time for a long time. And so those videos ended up, I ended up starting to collage those. And that sort of snowballed over a long period of time into what is the content of that Open Sky piece. And so it consists of like a lot of videos of the sky, of clouds, of the grass. And the other like major element, I'll just talk about this briefly, but was these experiments that I was doing in my studio with that projector screen that I had built. So basically what I was doing was I had hooked up this camera to that projector and was filming the screen that was projected on. Yep. So there was this feedback loop between the screen, the projector, the mirror, and the camera. And while I was working on another larger piece, I would just sort of mess with this weird apparatus that I had set up and like do these weird experiments where I would like put my hands in between the camera and the screen. And like, I didn't really have like an idea of what it was going to be in the long term. And neither did I with those other videos that I was shooting. But it ended up being just this big collection of images and videos that I was able to work from as a backlog to collage from in video. And yeah, so that's a very, very long-winded answer to like what that piece is.
Yeah, again, people go look at this on Mikey's website. It's the Open Sky project, and there's a video you can watch. And you described the main frame, and there's three kind of like video frames. Two on the sides are like these circles, and the main one is this arched, like you called it an altar, I think. Mm-hmm. And it very much evokes, like, just the physical structure of it evokes this sense, for me, I'm only speaking for me, I'm not saying this is what you intended, for me it invokes this like incredible sense of spirituality, just based the physical structure of the thing, like, so I'm engaging this already, being like, wow, this is going to be something. And then when you watch the video, and some of this is in your kind of like narrative, I think, description of the intent of the piece, but I very much felt this. It is a creation and apocalypse story, kind of, you know, all in one. And there's this like haunting music behind it too. Like, did you write that music?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that was very well done. Part of what you're talking about, I think, in this piece is and I think you say this in your description, the self-destructive qualities of the age we live in, of the human age. And so I'm kind of curious, what do you see as some of these self-destructive qualities that we have? I mean, there's some obvious ones I'm sure you'll mention, but
yeah, I mean, I think it really is an ecological thing, you know, like it really is something about climate change, about, you know, global catastrophe, and sort of dealing with that existential threat in a spiritual context, in a way that isn't trying to sell you this guilt that it's your fault or that you should be doing more, but sort of like trying to face it in like a way that doesn't feel the burden of like optimism. You know, I think a lot of the time the conversation about climate change sort of devolves into whether or not you're being defeatist in acknowledging the like likely future that we're facing. And so I felt like I wanted to like communicate that, and also like bring in, I guess, like my sort of like deeper existential feelings about like how small and insignificant we are in the grander scheme of things, and how like I feel like I was really trying to like tap into this like deeper energy of like the both like violent and deeply regenerative power of the earth.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah, I mean,
that like we will be eclipsed by that regardless.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like a doomsaying type of thing. It like you're saying, like for me, I'm only speaking about my reaction to this. It's beautiful, and I'm definitely picking up on that sense of potential destruction and renewal, right? And I wanted to ask you just like your own thoughts about this. Like, do you think we're heading for some kind of apocalypse? And on the other side of that, and I see this as a beautiful thing, like there's renewal after such a thing.
Right. I think it's hard for me to say what will happen because like I'm not a climate scientist, but I think it was more the fact that like I absorbed that information. Like when you hear things like that a lot of the earth is going to become uninhabitable within like 100 years, or that like we really only have, you know, like less than a decade to reverse climate change. Like, I mean, maybe it's succumbing to like a hopelessness that's like purposefully being propagated by the media, and maybe it's like fatalistic in that sense. But it felt super real to me, and I think it affects people around me in a real, measurable way. That like dread that comes with just taking that at face value, that like we may be some of the last people, and like I may be one of the last people to like experience the connection that we talked about earlier with nature, without the like threat that that same force is going to destroy you in your lifetime, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if something like a super volcano, which we wouldn't foresee, or an asteroid doesn't do it, and we're on this trajectory, I think you're right. Like, people's relationship to nature is going to change. It might be a thing that is scarier and more potentially terrifying on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
you know
and I think it's already becoming unstable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Even in like very subtle ways. Like, you know, I think about like when I was a kid growing up on the Cape, like I would go to the beach and I would always see this specific kind of jellyfish.
Right.
And I would always see like little critters around in the water. And now I go there and I just don't see anything. Like it's just a shifted ecosystem already. And there's great white sharks now.
I was just thinking that, like, great white, you could get eaten now.
Yeah, like that's like a very direct, like a manifestation of exactly the thing that I'm talking about, which is like the thing that like within my lifetime, what like has shifted from being this like, you know, rich and gentle force to like palpably manifesting the fact that it's being threatened. And I don't know. I feel like trying to communicate that in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned that. And I'm thinking of an example here, like in Western Massachusetts where we live. Like when spring comes around, the first thing I begin to think about is it's tornado season.
What?
20 years ago, we didn't experience tornadoes on a regular basis out here. Now, it's not unusual for there to be a tornado warning. You know, we get a couple every spring of, you know, potentially severe, really harmful weather events. Yeah, I mean, that's a change in the last 20 years.
Yeah, totally.
All right, I wanted to ask you about another piece in the looking through exhibition, which people can go see online. It's up there, so go check this out. It's the As Above, So Below piece. So I just want you to tell us a little bit about that, and I'm really interested in the technical aspect too of how you put that together using Photoshop and After Effects. And was that a new process for you? Is that something you tried for the first time on this piece?
Yeah, so that was a super new process for me. I mean, I think it was sort of like the first, or I mean, it was one of the first big projects where I really tried to like mash together my expertise into things that I felt were really separate before that point, which is like hand cut collage and video editing. And so the way that piece came together was I was working from the same like physical archive of images, which are all just like collected from magazines. And, you know, usually I'll just cut them out and like arrange this image on paper and paste them together there. But this time I basically instead decided that like that arrangement process would be completed in Photoshop. So I would scan all of the individual images and then arrange them in Photoshop, which would allow me to do things like, resize images, which I had never been able to do before. And like, I think I had actively avoided doing it because it felt like I was like, building up this very specific kind of practice up until that point. And so I had like completed that part of the process, which was really just like me letting myself go wild with, digital collage. And I was like talking to my advisor at the time, who's an artist named Jan Tichy, who is like one of my professors here at the school. And that's JanTichy. And he's a really interesting artist. And he really like helped me work through a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about with my practice at that time, and continued to after that semester. But basically what I ended up doing with his help was to animate the entire digital collage, and in individual sections and like as a whole, create this like looping video version of that collage.
Did this challenge you and change you as a collage artist in a way maybe you weren't anticipating?
It honestly really did, actually, because I think, with the hand cut work, one, I feel like the process involves this thing, which since this project, I've like made a concerted effort to like bring back in other ways, which is the aspect of like physical biofeedback between you and the thing that you're working on. And like with the hand cut stuff, it was like literally just cutting out the pieces of paper, looking at them, placing them on the paper and having that like tactile relationship with the images as objects rather than just images. And so with this project, I don't know, I kind of felt like deeply alienated from that aspect of my practice while it was happening, because it was all happening on the computer after a certain point.
Yeah.
And it was like a deeply ambitious project. And it was something that like I would come to my studio at 7 a.m. and work until 9 o'clock at night on. It was like that intensive, like just sitting in front of my computer, editing, and also like learning this kind of editing that I had never done before. And I mean, I feel kind of conflicted about it now because like I like the piece a lot, and I feel like it's super indicative of like where I was in my practice at the time. And I feel like in that way, it's a really successful piece. But I feel like it also kind of embodies like everything that I'm trying to avoid in my practice now.
What are some of those things that you'd like to avoid?
Well, one is like a process thing, which is I feel like it made me realize the thing that I really, or one of the things that I really love about my process is just working with stuff with my hands, like that aspect of making just really like got, taken out of the process completely. And I think that isn't just something that's like physically gratifying. I think it's something that plays into the way that you actually approach a project in a way that's kind of hard to describe. So there's that aspect of it, the sort of physical aspect of it. But I think there's also this aspect of restraint that I feel like is really important to the way that I approach work now, which is I feel like up until that project, I was convinced that I needed to say as much as possible in every piece. And I think it's, really what we were talking about with that A Quilt for Your Lungs, which is like, I felt this need to express the level of like information density that felt super present at the moment. And I think that A Quilt for Your Lungs piece marked the point where I felt like I could no longer achieve that by just cutting up pieces of paper. And I think the As Above, So Below was like me, like not yet realizing that I didn't need to do that and pulling out all the stops to do it. And I think, it's still interesting because it's so absurd, not just in the content, but like the amount of content. And I still feel like it's not necessarily too much. But I feel like it's more than is actually effective necessarily to say at once. In that it's asking maybe too much of my audience to, I don't know, to sit with something so didactic in that it's like saying a bunch of specific things in like a way that's like reading a book rather than like saying a bunch of like sensory things in a way that's like listening to music, Yeah.
And one of the things in the description of the piece that you talk about is it's talking about ideas around capitalism becoming a new religion. And we were talking about this earlier in our conversation. I'm just kind of curious to like maybe tie up that bow. Like, how do you think that impacts us as human beings when we are replacing the spirituality of religion with this spirituality of capitalism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's sort of imposed on us. But I think, when we understandably embrace that like our fulfillment is going to come from, just like material success or status or power or any of those things, or that like that work in itself is like fulfilling because you're just because you're doing something. I don't know if that really says it, but like I think that we lose touch with something about being human that is inherently fulfilling. I don't think I'm really doing that justice, but I think
you are. I think you are. And what's interesting is I think about that and I engage with the piece and some of your other work. It's like I know, and again, I'm only talking about my own experience with your pieces and these ideas. It's like I know, right, that like I know conceptually, right, if I buy that thing, it's not going to give me sustained fulfillment, right? Like I'm going to feel it in the moment. I'm going to feel good. Then there's going to be another thing. Like I know that my job, no matter how hard I work for them, right? No matter what I do, if I quit or I get fired, they're going to find somebody else next week. And in 3 weeks, no one will remember me. Like I know all of this stuff, like cognitively, yet I am told and fed, I believe, and I've bought into on some level I've not been able to overcome yet, this narrative coming from the media and other places that I must do these things. And it's like, for me, Stomping Jen, I'm engaged in Mikey. I'm engaged in this constant existential battle around these things.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff keeps me up at night.
Yeah, and I think, a big part of it for me is like specifically technology and social media.
Yeah.
And I think like something that I have sort of tried to incorporate in these other projects is specifically like the sort of like spiritual power of screens, and how light specifically is being used as like this tool of capitalism, this sort of like spiritually enticing tool to keep us like engaged. Like if you think about TVs or phones, like, and how those are sort of the driving things that keep us tethered to
Right.
To capitalism, whether it's like our work email or social media or the news or any of those things. Like I sort of think about that a lot in the light-based pieces that I'm doing now, and how I can approach digital images and like displaying them in a way that is that feels less corrupted by that quality, I guess.
Yeah. I just had a crazy idea pop into my head. Do you think there's a connection? All right, glass. I want to go with this idea of glass. We're attracted to glass. And I was just thinking when you were talking about stained glass and the property in churches and houses of worship and the effect of the light that stained glass has passing through it, and the people sitting in the church, and you're almost mesmerized in that space by the way the light is transformed. And somehow I was in my mind just like drawing a little dotted line to what you were talking about screens being spiritual experiences too.
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly it. And I think that is something that immediately came out of that first experiment with that backlit projection screen. When I was projecting the hand-cut collages on them, they transformed from being these flat paper images to like a stained glass window. They were like emitting light and color rather than reflecting it, which is like an inherently different thing. And it's like something that I think we deeply take for granted that we have access to, because it's something that's really only existed as like an accessible thing that you can do to turn a flat image into a glowing image is like something that took us like hundreds of thousands of years to be able to do. And now we can just do it whenever we want. Like, and so part of the thing that I'm trying to do with these light-based things is like recontextualize that ability in a way that one isn't using digital screens, because I feel like we inherently turn off that like phenomenological interest in our brain when we see a digital screen, because we're so hyper accustomed to using them. And two, like using materials that I feel like we don't usually associate with digital technology, specifically wood and paper.
Yeah.
And so that was like a huge part of thinking about Open Sky and about the thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is the stereographic light boxes, interior lens. So yeah, that's something that I think about all the time now, which is like, how can I like sort of harness the power of screens, which I feel like are this driving aesthetic force behind like this religion of capitalism, in a way that isn't like necessarily directly talking about that, but like talking about whatever I want, you know?
Yeah. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about interior lens. Tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that was a really fun project to sort of figure out. And it was like a puzzle for me to, that really, it started at the Brimfield Flea Market.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys ever been?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Out here in Massachusetts,
Yep.
Brimfield, Massachusetts. Yep.
Yeah. So that, I don't know if you guys know, but it's like one of the largest flea markets in the world.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think, my favorite place in the whole world. Like, it's just my favorite thing ever. Like, I absolutely love the Brimfield Flea Market and flea markets in general. There's another great one in Hadley, Mass. On Sundays in the summer that I love going to. But so I was there, and this was like right after, the mask restrictions were lifted for the first time in Massachusetts. And there was this sort of like, something in the air that just like felt magical to go outside and be around people.
Oh yeah. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah. So the Brimfield Flea Market happened like a couple days after that restriction was lifted. And I remember going there and just like feeling like I was in some kind of like fairy tale land, like walking around all these like bizarre objects. It's like really like in my element for me. I happened across this booth that had this huge collection of Viewmaster slides.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of them were like religious stories. And like they were these like staged photographs of like people acting out different scenes from the Bible. Oh, and I just was like immediately in love with them. Like it was just, it tapped into something. And I think it tapped into something that we were just talking about, which is like the quality of light coming from images. Cause these are like backlit photo slides, which are just backlit by like ambient light.
Yeah.
And, it also tapped into like, I had these as a kid. But I think there was something that struck me about these, which is that they were like significantly older than that. They were from like the early 1950s. And so I just started getting, one, I bought a bunch of them. And I bought like a Viewmaster slide viewer that I took home with me, and I was just like obsessed with it. And I started getting super into stereography, which is basically like how those photographs are taken, which is usually with like a stereographic camera, which just has two lenses that are separated about the distance of your eyes, and they expose two photos at the same time from those slightly different angles. Okay. And so when you view those images and one of your eyes is exposed to each of the images, and neither eye is seeing both of them, that is what creates what's called like the stereoscopic effect. And so that is how we see things in three dimensions, it just in the world. And it basically replicates that effect with photography. And this is something that's been around since like the early 1800s, which I just think is fascinating. Like, I think that's one of the most interesting things about photography is that we have had like three-dimensional viewing technology since like the time that railroads were like becoming a thing. Like
it was one of the first forms of porn. Stereographic images.
We'll get more into this later because there's another piece in the show that's a lenticular print, which is a similar kind of thing. And I was just looking for vintage lenticular prints on eBay, and like 90% of them are porn.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's
lenticular.
A whole can of worms. Yeah.
And I think, and that's a whole other like probably conversation and podcast about like how porn is like always on the leading edge of technology. Like whatever it is, like there is porn. It's like leading the way.
True.
Yeah. And anyway, sorry to derail us with porn.
No. It's great. It's great. But yeah, so anyway, I actually, before I got those Viewmaster slides, and maybe it's fair to say that like this story goes back a little further. I had a stereographic camera for like a few years before I found those Viewmaster slides, and I had taken photos with them. But I had never actually looked at the photos in a stereograph viewer. And so having that like prior knowledge of like how the system worked, I like really got back into it and started thinking about how I could integrate it into my practice. And so that was like right before I moved to Chicago. And so I brought those with me to Chicago, and I started working with them in this class that I was in, which was a digital light projections class. And it was taught by that same professor who like helped me through that big animation project. And so the first thing I ended up doing actually was building a projector that projected those slides from the Viewmaster. And it had two lenses, and one of the lights was red and one of the lights was blue. And you could look at the projected image with like blue and red 3D glasses.
Oh, wow.
And you could see the three-dimensional effect.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's something that maybe I should, go back to at some point. But that ended up being like a stepping stone of like me sort of like keeping alive this interest in stereography and light, and committing myself to figuring out a way to like bring that into my practice. And so basically what I ended up deciding to do was build a stereograph viewer. And I figured that out like relatively quickly, how to do that, because the principle of stereographic viewing is actually the exact thing that virtual reality is based on. Right. So VR viewers are stereograph viewers. And that makes it even more interesting to me that like VR in principle is something that's based in like this 1800s technology. And so this also ties into the exact same themes of like screens and digital technology and like the sort of phenomenological power of technology in our society and how it's being used, which I don't necessarily think is that interesting, and also is like objectively terrifying in the context of things like the metaverse.
Right.
And so I really wanted to find a way to like wedge my way into that conversation. And the way that it ended up happening was I went to this incredible store here in Chicago, which is called American Science and Surplus. And they sell like a bunch of really weird stuff that is just like a surplus from like science experiments. I don't really know where they get their stuff, but
That's crazy.
Had these little VR viewers that are meant for you to just slide your phone into.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like those are actually pretty common now. Things like Google Cardboard are
Right.
like pretty easy to find. And like these little viewers were like $3 a piece. And so I picked up a bunch of them, and I was like, if I can format one of the stereographic photos that I have taken for my phone, then I've made a stereograph viewer. Basically, all I have to figure out is how to do it without my phone. And I really quickly like reformatted one of those photos, a few of those photos that I took, and just airdropped them to my phone and slid my phone into the thing. And for the first time was able to look at those photos in like an actual three-dimensional way.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like chasing that high basically
Yeah.
throughout the process. And for a while, I had a hard time thinking of what the actual content was going to be, whether it was going to be things that I photographed, which is originally what I wanted to do, or if what it ended up being was these digital collages, which I can get into more, but basically that is where it ended up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that you, when people go to MikeyMosher.com and look at this, the interior lens section, you have these viewers on a wall, like pictures of them, and you built these? I mean, they're beautiful. They're beautiful, like, yeah, they're beautiful objects, like in and of themselves. They look like they could be like in a science fiction movie, right? Like, so like they are aesthetically beautiful. And like part of what I was thinking as you were talking to us about this is, yes, you're concerned with issues about digital technology, media, and you're working on pieces that have something to say about that, but you're also working with it too. Like you're building these, like you're making this stuff like this, and you're using the technology as well as having something to say about it too, right? Like I don't know, in my mind that is fascinating and interesting.
Yeah,
I love this.
Where do you get? Sorry, where do you get these images from? Like, I know you said magazines, but like, do you like curate different?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, like I should have an image of this on my website too. I don't know why I don't, but I have this crate, which is like filled with a bunch of folders, basically, that I've been like curating and collecting for, at this point, like 4 or 5 years. And so like some of those images have been in there that long. Some of them have been in there like a month, but basically like, I will usually get like a lot of magazines, like, like 20 at a time from like, that are just like on eBay or like at an estate sale or something like that. And, I mean, at first it was literally, just like old National Geographics. Like that was like my bread and butter for years. And that's actually what got me started collaging when I was in high school. My grandmother, and actually I'm having kind of a eureka moment right now, which maybe I can come back to this, but basically my grandmother had, this big collection of National Geographic magazines, which were just in my parents' basement when I was a kid. And I came along them after my grandmother passed away, and they just let me collage with them. There were probably like 100 of them. And so originally that was what I was working from. And then I started branching out to things like Life magazine, old Scientific American are really interesting. Usually things to do with like technology or American politics, Wired magazine, international affairs, or something like that. But yeah, it's like a wide range of different things. Most recently, my favorite thing is eyewitness books, which were like a really big thing when I was a kid. They're basically just like, like there'll be a topic like just technology, and it'll just be like a bunch of images. They're for kids, basically.
Okay.
But they were like mass produced in the 90s, and there's like hundreds of different issues of them. But yeah, like a lot of different stuff. And I'll get obsessed with one magazine to get a bunch of them for a while. And yeah.
So you literally just cut them out and catalog them?
Oh yeah. So this crate that I have has probably like 30 categories in it. It'll be like, Americana, or like, like geology, if it's like, maps of like weird, like infographics of land or stuff like that. Another one is like something like fire, like just images of fire. And then like, I have like 20, 30 folders of different things like that. And like, when I'm going through magazines, usually I'll just like look for images that like stand out to me, or like immediately something comes to mind that I could use it for. and I'll like cut it out and just like slide it into one of those folders. And yeah, so I've just been like building up that collection, and that's usually what I work from when I'm doing hand cut stuff. And actually, like that principle of having a backlog is like the thing that has fed all of these other parts of my practice that I try to adapt collage to, whether it's like video or things like found objects. Like I work best when I have a lot of stuff to work from, and that has been like helpful to figure out with these other experiments.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I do a similar thing for sound clips.
Yeah.
Like I have this sound library. Like, so when I'm editing, I usually don't do this for conversations with guests, but when we do episodes with just Jen and I'll edit in funny sound effects, that sort of thing. But, you know, I have a hard disk with, you know, hundreds of sound effects saved on it.
Yeah.
And all cataloged.
I just feel like I would get lost. So I like, sorry not to get into my process, but
No,
I like get in, I'll like, you know, rip things out of magazines and like stack them up. And then when I want to actually make a piece, like I'll like look through all the images and just pull things out, which is not organized in any way, shape, or form.
I mean, it took me a really long time to get to that point too. Like I spent probably like a decade just like having one folder and things were just in there. And then I think it was probably my girlfriend when we first met. I had like a couple of these big folders with like a bunch of stuff. And she was like, maybe you should organize that. And I was like, maybe I should.
Yeah. It's probably smart because I have so many boxes of magazines around the house, and I'm sure Sawtooth would love it if I would get rid of them.
And I'm constantly saying things like, boy, do we really need this box of magazines
and I'm like,
here?
just pretend like it's not there. Just like leave it alone. It's not there. It doesn't exist.
I mean, I think the thing that I realized after I started trying to organize them is that it really like makes the process easier and more fun. Because like you can more quickly be like, oh, I have that image somewhere. Like I know where to find it. And like you can keep up the momentum without like searching through folders for like half an hour and like getting bored of the thing that you're working on.
Yeah.
I love it. One last piece I wanted to ask you about, Mikey, was the interior castle. And this seemed really fascinating to me. And I was looking at the video of this on your website. So people go look at this. You're probably sick of hearing me say this, but you used a process you called 3D lenticular printing. Just tell us about the piece and just that process that you used.
Yeah. So I think most people have probably seen a lenticular print. At some point, it's usually, I mean, so there's a couple different kinds. There's a kind where it's like an image and it flips between two different images based on the angle that you're looking at the thing. And it'll be on like advertisements or, you know, they were really big in the 90s for like things like movie posters or they even have them on like random like notepads now. So there's that kind that flips between two images. And then there's a kind that you're looking at like basically a 3-dimensional image. And basically the way that it works is that there's this plastic film that goes over an image and it's made up of like hundreds of vertical things that are called lenticules. And those are basically lenses. And underneath that film is like an image that's formatted in this very specific way where each one of those plastic lenses is shown like a small strip of like a frame of an image from a specific angle. And so depending on where you're looking at the image, all of the different strips are showing you a different version of the image. So say that there is like an object and you take a picture of it from 10 different angles. Depending on the way that the lenticular is formatted, you will move from side to side and get the illusion that you're moving around that object because you're being shown, not only are you being shown a different thing as you shift, but your two eyes are seeing something slightly different So it's the same stereoscopic effect that we were talking about earlier, where you're being tricked into thinking that you're looking at something three-dimensional. And so the process of setting up that that lenticular was actually the exact same process as setting up the three-dimensional collages in the interior lens, which is basically like you have these separate layers of the collage. So you have like a Photoshop file, and like the things that are on top are on one layer, the things that are in the middle are on another layer, and they're stacked on top of each other. And then imagine those layers are like laid out in like 3D space, like increasingly further away from you. So like you have them sort of stacked up vertically, and in like basically like a 3D model on the computer, you are able to move a vantage point of those layers. So like you're moving like a virtual camera so that you can see those layers from multiple different angles. This is getting complicated, but basically you can export individual images that show you all of those different angles. Those can be then compiled into this really complicated kind of format, which I didn't do myself. This is something that I've allowed myself to outsource for the first time in my artistic career, which was, I think, for the sake of my mental health. But,
it's amazing to me that human beings were able to create something like that.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. I think people need to go and make sure you go and look at this. The way it moves around and comes alive is fascinating. Yeah. And that piece you were talking about, kind of meditating on or having something to say about the relationship between death, capitalism, and propaganda. Yeah. And we've talked about each of these things a little bit here on this episode. I'm just curious, is there a way that you see these ideas all connected for us as humans?
Yeah, I mean, I think for that piece in particular, well, for context, it started as a hand-cut collage. And in that collage were like actual holograms, which is like an entirely different kind of 3D imaging. But they were on the cover of National Geographic a few times. And so I had like these paper holograms that were in the collage. And then eventually I made the whole thing three-dimensional. But while I was working on it, I was listening to the audiobook of this book called The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, which is basically about like the relationship between disaster, like global disaster, famine, natural disasters, things like coups, and the propagation of capitalism throughout the world. And so I was working on this collage while like listening to this book and like thinking about like how, I mean, in a very general way, how capitalism thrives on like the like distraction that's created by suffering. How like, because of the way that the media works in America and other capitalist countries, like there is this spectacle that is created by death and suffering that is really often like a way for the power structures to come in and impose capitalism in situations like Katrina or in, coups in South America or in Iraq. And these are like the examples that are used in the book.
Right.
Basically that disaster is seen as an opportunity by people who want to gain power in other places. And so that's something that I think was trying to evoke in the piece, but I'm not sure if that was necessarily successful. And I think the piece is more of creating like a kind of satirical altarpiece in like devotion to this like system of capitalism, and like its relationship to death as a way of just criticizing that, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's a deep piece. Like there's so many visual elements in it. Like you can really get lost in this. Like I'm doing it now. I apologize. I'm falling into the piece. I'm looking at it. And the thing that I'm noticing, I just have to point this out, is there's kind of like an altar-like structure in the middle of it that's similar to the altar in the open sky piece we were talking about early on. I'm just seeing this here, and I'm
totally.
And I don't know. I think I was subconsciously making that connection before I voiced it out loud. Anyways, folks, go look at this stuff on the website. Smoking Jen?
I mean, that's what I like about your aesthetic is the multitude of visual elements that you can get lost in. I really am drawn to that kind of aesthetic. Because collage can be very minimalistic, and this is considerably not minimalist at all, which I love. I love, there's so many different ranges of, collages and ways people approach it. So,
so Mikey, what keeps you working in this medium? What's keeping you engaged with it?
That's a really good question. I think with hand cut collage specifically, I think I have a relationship with it now that it just feels, I mean, maybe it's cliche to say that it's therapeutic, but I feel like that's how I feel about it. I think it just feels like a way, it's like a muscle that I really worked up, and it feels like super natural to work that way. And so I think it's just grounding, and I think it's the thing that feeds all the other parts of my practice. And it's sort of like I'm working off of this blueprint of hand cut collage and adapting it to other things. And so I think going back to actually cutting things up by hand and rearranging them just makes me feel kind of grounded in the way that I'm approaching my other projects. And so it's kind of like this cycle that like feeds itself in a way.
Yeah, I love that. And where do you see yourself going over the next months, years, if you know?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm really putting I'm putting a lot of energy into just having fun with my practice again, because I've been working on a lot of really big projects for a while, working towards the MFA thesis show that we've been talking about this whole time. So I'm just sort of taking a break from big projects, starting to just have a nicer relationship with my practice. And in addition to that, I'm also trying to show the stuff that I've been working on more, to reach out to galleries, make connections with people here in Chicago, and
sure.
Just try to share this stuff as much as I can.
Do you find that like the new ideas and the stuff that moves you forward as an artist is found in the fun, the playing, or is it in the big projects that put pressure on you to get something done, or is it in both, or in all places?
That's a great question. I think, I think an interesting example of this is like when I was working on that big animation piece, As Above, So Below. When I was working on that, that's when I was goofing off and doing the like feedback loop experiments that became Open Sky. Yeah. And so like there really isn't like the fun projects and then the big projects. It's like the fun projects become the big projects. Right. And then I have to come up with other smaller fun things to work on that become big projects. And so like it's like, those feedback loop experiments were the seeds that I was planting while I was like, I was pulling out while I was harvesting, as above, so below. And, now I've like harvested everything I possibly could. And now I'm just like, for the first time in a long time, just planting seeds.
I love that.
And like, it's funny because like, I feel like I've been in this like cycle where those things overlap for like years at this point. And I feel like this is really the first time in a really long time that I've had to like everything ends at once, and I can sort of just like, it's up to me to start it back up again. And I'm having a really good time doing that.
Yeah. Cool. I love hearing that. And I can't wait to see what you come up with over the next couple of years, and into the future. Before we go to our last two kind of fun questions, I think they're fun. Stomping Jen. Anything else you want to tell us?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I know we've covered a lot. So. We're coming up on an hour and 45 minutes.
We broke our time barrier.
I mean, we covered stuff that, Oh, actually, there is one thing that I'd like to talk about really quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. For sure.
Yeah.
So there's one project that's not on my website yet, and I'm still kind of working on it. But it's kind of like, I think, part of the next chapter of the things that I'm working on, and it's this projection piece that is like a replica of my family's house on the Cape. And this is a house that has been in my family since the 1930s. And it's like a little cottage in the woods. And it's where my grandmother used to live. And this is like the grandmother who collected all of the collage pieces, or like the National Geographic magazines that became my first collages. And so the piece is basically like, it's like an acrylic frame, and it's wrapped in vellum, which is the same paper material that's the screen in Open Sky. And basically I'm like projecting on it from underneath, and there's like this open space in the middle of the house structure, which is hanging from the ceiling, by the way. And so the inner surfaces of the house are being projected onto with images of the actual house. And so it's like this glowing version of the house that's like sort of suspended in space. And basically, like, I was reflecting on a lot of really similar themes to Open Sky, which are like, I mean, this house is in like this low-lying area near the ocean. And I'm thinking about how it's been in my family for so long. And also I might be one of the last people in my family to be able to like enjoy it in the way that I've been able to, because it's like in kind of a vulnerable place. And it's like continually being like threatened by like increasingly extreme weather events on the Cape. And obviously like rising sea levels. And so it's kind of like a reflection on that, and also like an attempt to create this like idealized version of the house that I can share with other people. And so I made like a first version of it last semester, and I'm like just starting to like get back into it and potentially show it in public. And so that's something I'm super excited about. And also like I'm thinking about, doing a longer term project, sort of like excavating a lot of like themes from this house. Specifically, there was this religious cult that lived on the property in the 1800s. Oh, wow. And we could do a whole other podcast about this. Yeah. It's really, really interesting. But basically, the leader of this cult lived on the property, and he sacrificed his daughter. He stabbed her in the chest
Jesus.
because he thought he was sort of like called by God to do this sacrifice and that she would be resurrected from the grave.
Oh my God.
And this happened on the property where my grandmother lived, and where and I think my family were the only people to live there after this murder happened. So there was like a 50-year period where the place was vacant after the murder happened because no one wanted to live there.
Yeah.
And
that's messed up.
So there's like this direct line between my family finding this place that had been basically abandoned for years to me spending time there now and creating this piece of art about this place. And I mean, there's like this direct line between like the apocalyptic ideology that these people had and like the very real prospect of apocalypse happening at the place where they were talking about this stuff over 100 years ago.
And I'm thinking about, you know, how renewal connects to apocalypse, and like the story you just told us. Like, yeah, this horrible thing happened on that land, right? But 50 years later, your family came across it, bought it, and like generations of people have like enjoyed it and had like wonderful experiences on that land.
Yeah.
And it's that like yin and yang and that interplay between, you know, destruction and rebirth. Oh, that's fascinating. Totally. That is so fascinating. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course.
I hope I hope it all makes its way. I hope it all makes its way into a piece of art from you we can enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I feel like the more I had the chance to talk about that in particular, I feel like the more urgent I feel about trying to manifest that into something physical, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Woo. Okay. So, what do you like to do when you're not working on art or trying to get through your school program? Like, what do you like to do just to reconnect to Mikey?
I love watching TV. Honestly, that's like one of my favorite things to do when I'm not working. I love having a good show to watch. The thing that I just finished watching today is this new show called Severance.
I just talked to you about that.
Stephen King wrote a rave review about it, and it's got
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's got me kind of salivating to get into it.
I think it's absolutely excellent. I think it's one of the best shows I've watched in a while.
Oh, good.
I have to watch it tonight.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought that was great.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of scratches a niche maybe in like just my interest in like cinematography and film in general. I mean, I love movies too. I think I can be a little impatient, but when I find a movie that I love, I like really love it.
Yeah.
I have like a good handful of movies and like directors that I really love. Specifically, I really love Robert Eggers. Have you seen like The Witch or The Lighthouse?
Yeah.
Oh, don't talk about The Lighthouse.
Love The Lighthouse.
I hate The Lighthouse.
I love The Lighthouse.
I hate it. You guys can talk about it. I absolutely hate that movie.
I loved The Lighthouse, Mikey. It was great.
Honestly, I think, you know, I don't know how your schedule is. I would love to do another episode just like about like New England, like folk horror, because I think it connects to the thing that we were just talking about this cult murder, but it also connects to like that genre of film, which I love.
Yeah, we could do that for sure. Like maybe a little later in the summer, we'll get you on the schedule and bring you back and do it. Okay.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Well, now.
Cool. Yeah. Mikey Mosher, we've come to the end. And
went way over our time.
And let me just say, like, it didn't feel like it. And I was cutting us a little bit short too. Like, and I feel like there are more conversations to be had in the future with you. So, thank you so much for coming on and sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was just a great conversation. I loved it. Stomping Jen, anything you want to say?
Oh, thank you.
All right.
I'm very excited to have connected with you.
All right, cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks. Our listeners, a couple of things. Stomping Jen, what do we say to our listeners? We say thank you for being there, right?
Yeah.
We appreciate you.
We do.
If this is the first time you're hearing the podcast because you know Mikey or you're interested in collage art or something else, we're going to ask you to subscribe to our podcast, download our episodes.
Share them.
We have lots of great conversations with interesting guests. We're well over 180 episodes at this point. We've got a deep back catalog you can go and check out. And we've got lots of interesting people coming up. Also,
yes,
there are episodes where it's just you and me talking, Stomping Jen.
Gosh,
those are fun.
Oh, so fun.
All right. Also, check out our website, please.
Yes,
softservepodcast.com. You can see some of our featured interviews with national figures.
All right. Yes.
Lots of people.
There's stuff on our website.
Yeah,
people.
go check it out. All right. Getting a little punchy, Stomping
Yes,
Jen.
you are getting a little punchy.
Okay,
we have to
folks.
Cut you off at the knees.
So we're just going to go around and say goodbye in our own special way. Let's give our honors to our guest, Mikey Mosher.
Just to say goodbye.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
All right. I love it. Stomping Jen.
Bye now.
All right. And I'll just say the same thing. Bye now.
This world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility. That all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the sources, scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth. And that in the goodness of time, all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed by the binding force of mutual respect and love. I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road.